Death at Bishop's Keep, Chapter 41. In quiet she reposes. Ah, would that I did too. Matthew Arnold, Requiescat. The next morning Kate woke and dressed as usual. Alone in the breakfast room, she openly ignored Aunt Jagger's interdiction and read from the newspaper. Having finished both breakfast and the newspaper, she glanced at the clock. 9 o'clock. Aunt Sabrina would certainly summon her if she was wanted, after yesterday's upset. It was probably better not to disturb her. What to do? Feeling at loose ends, Kate put on sturdy boots and a coat, and went to climb over the ruined stone walls of the old keep. Tiring, she sat in a quiet corner with her back against the wall of dark flint cobbles, watching the mist rise from the quiet lake and thinking back over the events of the past few days. The relationship between Aunt Sabrina and Aunt Jaggers had frozen into an icy glacier, and the scarcely disguised animosity of the servants added to the chilly foreboding that seemed to Kate to seep throughout the house like the tendrils of mist over the lake. If she were no longer to work for Aunt Sabrina, should she stay on? Would it not be better if she gave her notice? It was not what she wanted to do, but she did not want to stay in a place where the atmosphere was so poisonous that it infected even her own usually buoyant spirits. At 10, she went indoors and climbed the stairs to her room. If Kate had no work to do, Beryl Bardwell had an abundance. She settled herself at her desk, took out the manuscript of The Conspiracy of the Golden Scarab, and dipped her pen in the inkwell. She was about to begin drafting the scene in which Mrs. Bartlett plotted the murder of the Egyptian gentleman, when she heard cries in the halls and the noise of hurrying feet. Kate went to the door and threw it open. "What is it, Amelia?" she asked. The maid had a foul-smelling lidded chamber pot in her hands. "Oh, miss!" Amelia cried in panic. "Mrs. Jaggers took terrible sick." Averting her face from the stinking pot, she hurried down the hallway to the stairs. Kate went to her aunt's bedroom. The heavy velvet drapes were tightly drawn against the daylight. In the dimness she saw Aunt Jaggers in a white cotton nightgown, doubled over in bed, clutching her heavy abdomen. Her face was contorted with retching pain, and her skin had a jaundiced cast that frightened Kate. The bed-sheets were twisted and rank with sweat and liquid excrement. Mrs. Pratt straightened up, holding the wash-bin into which Aunt Jaggers had vomited a greenish-grey slime. Vomit slicked the cabbage rose carpet beside the bed. The fat terrier, ears and tail quivering nervously, cowered in the corner. "Has the doctor been sent for?" Kate put her hand on Aunt Jaggers' forehead. It was wet with perspiration, and the skin felt clammy. "Bucket's gone, miss." Miss Pratt turned away to dump the contents of the basin into a half-full bucket. There was, Kate thought, a tone of grim satisfaction in the cook's voice, and a glance at the desperately ill woman huddled on the bed seemed coldly pitiless. Kate thought of Jenny. It would be no wonder if Cook derived a dour compensation from the woman's suffering. Aunt Jaggers arched her back with a loud cry, and a convulsive shudder shook her whole body. Her eyes rolled in her head, showing yellowy whites, and she shrieked in pain. Then she flung herself over the edge of the bed and began to retch into the basin that Mrs. Pratt once more thrust forward. Kate ran for her own room and brought back basin, water, and clean cloth. When Aunt Jaggers was once again lying on the pillow, exhausted, she began to apply the wet cloth to her forehead. Her aunt's eyes were wide open and staring fixedly, the pupils sharply dilated. Her pulse, when Kate at last managed to find it, was slow and irregular, although she was breathing fast in shallow gasps. The next hour was a melee of confusion. Miss Pratt with the basin, Amelia with the chamber pot, and Kate with intent on keeping Aunt Jaggers from flinging herself off the bed in her convulsive thrashings. Dr. Randall arrived at last, a stout, genial-looking gentleman whose heavy jowls were frosted with old-fashioned white mutton-chop whiskers. "Indigestion, is it?" he asked in a booming voice. He opened his bag and took out his stethoscope. Let's see. But when he looked up from a quick examination of Aunt Jaggers, his glance was worried. "What is it?" Kate asked. "What's wrong with her?" Aunt Jaggers roused herself with an effort. "Poison!" Her voice was a threat-like whisper. "I've been poisoned!" "Don't be foolish," Dr. Randall replied with a loud heartiness, as if he were speaking to a deaf person. "Been eating oysters? There have been some trouble with taint hereabouts. Several taken ill." "No oysters," Kate said. Aunt Jaggers began to flail frenziedly, and a stream of wild words poured out of him. Hysterical, Dr. Randall said. He took a bottle out of his bag. This should set matters right straight away, I warrant. He measured out a thick liquid into a teaspoon. But the medicine, whatever it was, brought no quick improvement, and within 5 minutes Aunt Jaggers had vomited it violently into the basin. The doctor looked on, perplexed, stroking his nose with his thumb. Kate stood with Amelia at the foot of the bed, watching apprehensively. At last Aunt Jaggers quieted, her limbs relaxed, and she seemed to pass into a deep sleep. Her mouth slack and her breath hoarse and raspy, a slug's trail of saliva on her flabby chin. "Ah," the old doctor remarked with some relief. "We're past the crisis, I'd say." He put the bottle of medicine on the bedside table. "Spoonful of this every 3 hours, keep her warm and quiet. I expect to find her greatly recovered when I return this afternoon. Greatly recovered," he had added loudly, with an admonishing look at the sleeping Aunt Jaggers, as if instructing his patient in the cause of her improvement. "What do you think made her ill?" Kate asked. "Hard to say," Dr. Randall replied. "You're certain about the oysters?" As Kate nodded, he snapped his bag shut. "What did she eat for breakfast?" Kate shook her head. "I don't know." "No one ate except for the young miss, sir," Miss Pratt offered. "According to Mutt, that is." "Dinner was about 8 last night," Kate said. "Not likely food poisoning, then," the doctor remarked with an air of authority. "Symptoms would have been felt within 4 or 5 hours. He looked at Kate. "You seem healthy enough. Any symptoms?" Kate was about to answer when Nettie rushed into the room, her eyes big, her thin face pale. "It's Miss Otley," she gasped. "I went to do a bed and found her on the floor. She's bad sick." Leaving Amelia to watch over the sleeping Aunt Jaggers, Kate and the doctor ran to Aunt Sabrina's room, Mrs. Pratt and Nettie at their heels. The scene there was much alike that in Aunt Jaggers' room. Bed-clothing rank and disarranged, the basin overflowing with vomit, the chamber pot brimming. Aunt Sabrina was sprawled on the floor by the door, her nightgown drenched with cold sweat, the bell-rope clutched in one hand. "Poor lady," Nettie whispered. "She must have pulled it straight off the wall." "Weren't nobody to hear below stairs," Miss Pratt said sadly. Her voice hardened. "We've all been tending the other one." Kate summoned Mutt, who was hovering in the hallway. He and the doctor managed to lift Aunt Sabrina back onto the bed. Her breathing was so shallow that Kate thought at first she was dead, but once in the bed her eyelids flickered. "Mother," she moaned. Her breath was foul with the smell of vomit, and her nightdress reeked with her waist. "Don't be angry, Mother. I did not mean to soil myself." "Out of her head," Mrs. Pratt said judiciously. Dr. Randall dispatched Nettie for the medicine he had left with Aunt Jaggers and began his examination. Kate stepped to the other side of the bed and took Aunt Sabrina's cold, clammy hand. "It'll be all right, Aunt," she said quietly. Aunt Sabrina's eyes flew open, the whites yellowed and sickly looking. An expression of confusion came over her face. "Who—" "It's Catherine." Kate smothered her arms' matted hair away from her face. "Your niece." Aunt Sabrina stared at her wonderingly for a moment, and then the confusion seemed to clear. "Catherine," she whispered. Saliva trickled out of one of the corners of her mouth, and she spoke with what seemed like an intense effort. "I must see the vicar." Dr. Randall straightened up. "Things haven't arrived at that state yet, my dear Miss Otley. You'll be up and around in no time, I promise it." His face belied the assurance of his words. Aunt Sabrina leaned over the bed to retch into the basin Miss Pratt held. When she had finished, Kate gently pulled her back and began to wipe her forehead. She reached up to clutch Kate's hand. "I must see the vicar," she whispered quickly, thickly. "Must tell him—" Her eyes closed and her voice trailed off in an incoherent string of muttered syllables. Kate leaned closer. "Tell him what, Aunt?" "To tell Jocelyn—" "Jocelyn?" Aunt Sabrina's eyes opened wide with a spasm of pain twisted on her face. "My child." She grated between the clenched teeth. Dr. Randall straightened up, shaking his head. "Delirious." "She does not have a—" "Absolutely not. Known her all her life. Splendid woman, but never had a husband, never had children. Can vouch for that." He frowned, looking around. "Where the devil is that girl with the medicine?" Nettie rushed back into the room, her eyes open and face ashen. "She's dead!" she cried hysterically. "Miss Jaggers is dead!" "Dead?" Miss Pratt gasped and tipped the basin, spilling vomit on her skirts. I swear it, Nettie cried in a wild voice. Her eyes is open, but Maud says 'tis true. Dead? The doctor said incredulously. He stood as if frozen. But go, Kate commanded, with all the authority she could muster. I'll stay here. Dead? Aunt Sabrina struggled frenziedly to raise herself. Bernice is... Please, Aunt, Kate begged, gripping her shoulders and pushing her gently down to the pillow as the others hurriedly left the room. Whatever has happened, we will take care of it. You must rest and get well. Kate didn't want to think about what had happened in that other bedroom, or what would happen if Aunt Sabrina's eyes were locked on Kate, and a new urgency seemed to grip her. The vicar has my will, she said slowly, distinctly. The angles of her face seemed to have altered, and Kate could see the outline of fragile bones and the nearly transparent skin. See to the letters and the cipher manuscript in the safe. Give everything to Barfield. Barfield? The vicar. Of course, Kate said, but you're going to be just fine, Aunt Sabrina. She smiled with the confidence that she did not feel was true. Just rest and I leave it to you, my Catherine, Aunt Sabrina whispered. Jocelyn has no need. Her mouth relaxed in the faint ghost of a smile. You must carry on. You are the last Artley. Kate smoothed back the loose grey hair. Please, she said desperately, just rest. You're going to get well. She tightened her grip on her aunt's hand as if to pull her back from whatever dark precipice lay ahead. You're going to get well, she repeated fiercely. A few minutes later, Aunt Sabrina lapsed into unconsciousness. She died a little after 1 o'clock that afternoon.